What is up, duelists? To an offline recording new card reaction, because I'm not streaming today, but this card is certainly worth an immediate reaction. This card is called the Ultimate Sky and is part of the utility selection. We've already looked at a couple of pretty good cards from that pack that is about to come out in the OCG soon. We don't know exactly when these cards are hitting the TCG yet, but the pack, as the name suggests, is full of a bunch of generic cards. Essentially, it feels like they are trying to revolutionize the way non-engine works in the game of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And I mean, I, as someone who's critiqued a lot of what non-engine is currently doing in the game, am very much looking forward to some alternative ways to win going second and so on and so forth. So let's take a look at Ultimate Sky, because this is a very interesting quick play spell card from this pack. And it says, if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, activate one of these effects, but you can only use each of these effects of this card's name once per turn. Target face-up cards on the field up to the number of face-up monsters your opponent controls. Pay 800 for each target, negate their effects until the end of this turn, or when your opponent activates a monster effect in hand or grave, negate that effect. So, the reason why I'm so excited to talk about this card is because I think this card does a lot of things right in terms of card design that I've just repeated over and over again when we were talking game design and card design on this channel or in general. First of all, I love that this card is usable, much better going second, but usable going first. One of my favorite things on non-engine is when the cards are significantly better going second, but unlike something like a Mulcharmy or a Dark Ruler No More, this card is not completely useless when you go first, which I think introduces a lot of frustration sometimes when you want to play those cards in the main deck. And if you only can put those cards in your side deck, then they don't have impact on as many games as they possibly could. So in this case, I like that this card, in theory, can be used in a couple of decks. I mean, essentially, the bigger your board, the worse this card is going first, which I think is a good start. But just in general, I mean, let's look at what we have here. We have a card that is a quick play board breaker going second that essentially can be a Dark Ruler. Of course, your opponent can interact with it with monster effects. They can negate it if they want to, but you can just, in theory, negate every single monster they control with this card. It does target, unlike something like Forbidden Droplet, but it does, if your opponent has 4 monsters, you get to negate 4 face-up cards, so that could be all of their monsters. Doesn't have to be, though. It could be better than that, because you could wait until your opponent activates, let's say, a trap card or a quick play spell on your turn, and you can negate that card as well, because it just says face-up cards. So something like, I don't know, let's say you're playing against Draco Tail, you can wait for your, or Branded for that matter, I guess that's more relevant recently, and your opponent activates a set Fallen and the Virtuous, you can respond with this card, negating a couple of their monsters, but also the Fallen and the Virtuous, which is very, very strong when you are playing into a board. And then there is this second effect here, which honestly, I think is the weaker use of the card, but it does have a couple of interesting applications. You know, one of the biggest feel-bad moments in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is when you're playing into a board, and then behind that board, they activate a card like Droll Lockbird or Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. And while making this card doesn't completely get rid of the problem, it at least gives the player going second a way to negate those cards, which you might say like, oh, Josh, but aren't you hating on Called by the Grave all the time? So is negating hand traps really something that cards should do? For the player going second, I have absolutely no issue with that. If the player going second has Called by the Grave, I think that's completely fine. If the player going second has access to a card like this, I think that's completely reasonable. But the player going first negating hand traps is where I have an issue with Called by the Grave. And also cards like Droll Lockbird, particularly behind the board, is when it's the most obnoxious. So I'm a big fan of a lot of the designs on this card, and I especially like that for some decks, this card is even main deckable. Basically, any trap deck or any deck that doesn't try to make a big board could be main decking this card. I'm thinking of something, I mean, Sky Striker is my favorite example. It's even a quick play spell. You can discard it for Radiant Typhoon Vision. But mainly, let's say Sky Striker, you go first, you summon a 0, you pass. This card is basically live all the time, because as soon as you tribute your 0, you're even down to 0 monsters on the field. And you can then negate a card that your opponent has just played, or you can even negate an Ash or a Bell if they try to negate your 0. So essentially, you get to test the waters, activate 0, see if they chain Ash or Bell. If they do, then you can negate them with this, because you currently don't have monsters. Of course, you have to wait until your opponent has a monster. And if they don't have a way to Ash or Bell your 0, then you can negate their normal summon or the spell that they just activated or whatever. So In decks that don't make big boards, this card is actually useful going first. In other decks, it's much better going second, of course. I mean, even in Sky Striker, this card is much better going second than going first, but it does have application. So, very interesting. And I mean, the thing is, like, and this is also something that I believe I saw a Jeff Jones tweet earlier today who said that I mean, I think he understands the point of the card, but he's just questioning, like, okay, this is just another band-aid fix, right? Like, we are making a card to fix a problem instead of making sure that the problem doesn't exist, right? Like, we make crazy board breakers, we make these kind of cards that can negate roll behind the board instead of getting rid of the decks that require them to make these cards in the first place, right? Which I think is a valid criticism, and I think that is probably a topic for a video on its own. The whole cycle of band-aid fixing problems, right? Like, Konami makes powerful combo deck, then makes powerful hand trap or board breaker or whatever to deal with that combo deck, and then they make combo deck stronger in order to deal with the more powerful board breakers. Rinse and repeat, right? And a lot of people would like the game to escape that cycle. At the moment, we are in a, I mean, it's just a matter of fact that is how Konami does things at the moment. And I mean, most of the time, the game is still fine. But once again, I think that is an interesting topic for a more in-depth discussion somewhere down the line. At the point where we are right now, you know, of course, I'm the first one to say I think they should get rid of combo decks instead of giving us other tools to go second. But still, as of right now, it doesn't look like that's happening, which I'm not happy about. But still, I like that they are giving us better tools for going second again that aren't just negation hand traps like Imperm, Impulse, Purge, Ash, Veiler, that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan of the ninja guy that tributes two of your opponent's monsters when you're going second. That is in Beyond the Brave, and also a big fan of the Mind Mirror Force. That one is also in this utility selection. I've reacted to that one previously. It was a couple weeks ago. That card is amazing, and this card is also, I think, very well designed. I think even in a world where decks make like fairer boards, I think this card is okay to exist. It is a pretty powerful card going second. I mean, just being able to negate like a bunch of cards, including back row that they've just activated, is very powerful. The reason why I'm okay with this one is I think it encourages people, if this card's in the format, it encourages people to make layered end boards, which is one of my more favorite ways to play the game, is if it's not all just monster effects that are all presented on your field right now, but rather you have like you split up your interruptions into like some cards from your hand, maybe some back row, maybe an effect from the graveyard, maybe something that you're just going to fuse into at a later time. Lots of different ways to layer a board, and I mean, different decks have different ways to layer, but just outright presenting your opponent with a bunch of monsters that try to do whatever is not going to work in the face of this card or in a format where this card is popular. I've even seen some people say that they think this card is not good enough, and I think for game one, even though the card can work going first, I think it's relatively specific, because it takes a while. When you go first, it takes a while until your opponent has more monsters than you do for most decks. I mean, the example I gave earlier with Sky Striker, or when you're playing a trap deck like Labyrinth, or, I mean, God forbid, Paleozoic, the card would be live on turn one, but in trap decks, I mean, the fact that it's not a trap matters, so it's worse in those decks. I'm not sure if you want to play it. In Sky Striker, I think it's really good, but I'm struggling to think of other examples of decks where you can realistically main deck this card. I think your deck probably would have to end on one, maximum two monsters for you to consider playing this card, because otherwise you're going to have to wait a long time until your opponent actually has more monsters than you do. You have to let so many cards resolve. Your opponent probably even has a way to remove this card before you even get to use it. And so I think this is going to be a buff to some decks in general, but also just an option for side decking. Like if you have a deck that has a lot of, like, this helps, going second, this helps a lot of engine heavy decks, because engine heavy decks often have this thing where they can push into boards quite well. What they cannot do is they cannot deal with something like Droll and Lockbird behind the board. And so those are the type of decks where you would, I think, side deck this card, where you can like go second, have your opponent make a board, and then start playing into it with strong engine, test the waters. After your first search, you're going to see if they have Droll and Lockbird. If they do have Droll and Lockbird, you can negate it with this. if they don't have Droll and Lockbird, you can just use this as a board breaker and try to interact with their board in that fashion. Which actually could, for the first time ever in Droll and Lockbird's lifespan, actually introduce a little bit of skill on how to use Droll, because if you want to play around this card with your Droll and Lockbird, you might want to say, I'm not going to Droll after your first search, because I want to make you think that you don't have that you don't have it, or that I don't have it. And so you're going to use this card on something else, and then I will Droll you later, which is, I think, the most skillful in theory, if that's even how people are going to think about it. But that's the most skillful Droll would ever feel, because normally you just activate it on the first thing and just call it a day. But yeah. Yeah, this card negates Droll behind boards, it negates Ash behind boards, it negates Nibiru behind boards, which are all things that are problematic in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It helps the player going second, is a pretty good board breaker without being too insane, I think, and even has some applications in some decks going first. So overall, I'm happy with it. Is it a band-aid fix? Absolutely. Yeah, you could fix those problems by making decks weaker and by getting rid of some of the non-engine that is toxic if it's used behind a board, which are my preferred ways to fix it. Am I still happy that we're getting these powerful board breakers and utility cards in a world where decks are incredibly powerful going first at the moment in Yu-Gi-Oh? Yeah, I'm happy about it. I still think it's something that's necessary. I just hope that this doesn't really prompt them to make the combo decks even stronger, and I'm saying this in regards to something like the Medius lore decks getting even crazier support now, even though they're already incredibly powerful going first. And I feel like part of their justification for that is probably like, oh, we're making powerful board breakers right now anyway, so let's give them more combo pieces to work with. I'm also not incredibly happy with that, but I mean, at the point where we are with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now, we do need those crazy board breakers, or we need them to make a huge ban list and get rid of a bunch of generic endboard pieces that a lot of different combo decks are ending on. You know, I'm looking at stuff like Varudra, Cyframe Lord Omega, maybe Crystal Wing, like a lot of the stuff that you see over and over and over again pop up in different variations of combo decks. But that's, once again, story for a different video, probably. I was happy when I read this card. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'll stop rambling about it now, but I do think the future of non-engine in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very interesting topic, and one that is going to decide a lot on how the game is going to evolve moving forward, because in modern days, non-engine honestly feels more important than what kind of engine you're playing, because most engines are really strong in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Most decks are able to make really strong boards or have a strong grind game and deal with most situations, but the non-engine is what is supposedly keeping everything in check, and honestly a lot of the times winning games. So the direction that they want to take non-engine is an interesting one. This could also be a response to them banning Called by the Grave in the OCG. It's just something I'm just now thinking of, which I'm praying every day that that's what they are doing in the TCG as well, that they're getting rid of Called by the Grave. And the fact that they realize by making this card that something like Droll and Ash behind the board is definitely a problem makes me hopeful that those cards are also going onto the ban list, or getting harder hits in the future is something I'm definitely hoping for. Anyways, let me know what you think of Ultimate Sky, and thank you for watching.